October 2010. In the misty dawn of a chilly October morning in Portland, Oregon, Elisa McCain stood in her bedroom, a small space that seemed to close in around her as she paced nervously back and forth. The room was dimly lit, the pale light of the rising sun casting long shadows through the blinds. She could no longer ignore the knot of worry tightening in her stomach. Her best friend, Ruby Simmons, had been unreachable for over a week, and the silence was becoming unbearable. Elisa's eyes darted to her phone on the coffee table. She had already called Ruby dozens of times, her calls going straight to voicemail. Messages went unanswered. Desperation gnawed at her, growing with each passing second. Finally, with a trembling hand, she picked up the phone and dialed emergency number 911. "Portland Police Department, what's your emergency?" came the calm, professional voice of the dispatcher on the other end of the line. "It's my friend Ruby," Elisa said, her voice quivering, barely holding back the fear that gripped her. "She's been missing for a week. Her phone's been off, and I'm afraid her husband, John, who she was going to divorce, might have done something to her. She used to tell me she was afraid of him, that he might hurt her." Elisa's words spilled out in a shaky rush, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. She struggled to keep her voice steady as she recounted Ruby's fears. "Ruby told me a few times she was thinking about leaving him because things are getting worse. I got her text last week. It said, 'We fought again today. He threatened to kill me. If I left him, John might hurt me.'" That was the last I heard from her. As Elisa spoke, her mind flashed back to those conversations with Ruby, the moments when her friend's voice had cracked with anxiety, her eyes darting around as if expecting John to walk in at any moment. Ruby had always been guarded, but that last message felt different. It felt like a cry for help. Detective Sarah Blake was immediately assigned to the case. She was known in the department for her methodical approach, her ability to dissect even the smallest clues. With over a decade of experience in both homicides and missing persons cases, Detective Blake had earned a reputation for her relentless pursuit of the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Standing just outside her office, Blake received the details of the call. Her expression remained composed, though her eyes narrowed slightly, reflecting a sharp focus as she absorbed each word. She was a patient investigator, one who believed in letting the details simmer until they formed a clear picture. There was something about this case that already felt off to her, too many pieces that didn't quite fit. As Detective Blake headed toward Elisa's house, she replayed the details in her mind. A missing person, a text message suggesting violence, a husband who might be involved. On the surface, it was a classic case, but Blake had learned long ago that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. Detective Blake went to Elisa's house to learn more. She showed her friend Ruby's photo and a text message that came from Ruby's mobile number on October 13th. Detective Blake noted down Ruby and her husband's mobile number. Blake sent the mobile numbers to an expert to find Ruby's mobile last locations. Blake told Elisa to stay calm and said she would find Ruby. Detective Blake's first move was to piece together Ruby's last known movements, a crucial step in tracking down her whereabouts. She sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the location data pulled from Ruby's cell phone records. The data indicated that Ruby's phone last pinged from her home in Northeast Portland late in the evening, the same night she disappeared. But what caught Blake's attention was John Miller's location. His phone had been tracked to an area near Forest Park, a sprawling woodland reserve just 2 miles from their house, at nearly the same time. The park was dense with towering trees and winding trails, the kind of place where secrets could easily be hidden or buried. With this information in hand, Detective Blake decided to pay John Miller a visit. She arrived at his house in the late afternoon, the air heavy with the smell of fresh paint mingling with the crisp autumn breeze. As she approached, she noticed John standing outside, directing painters who were busy applying a new coat to the walls. The activity seemed odd to her, a bit too coincidental given the timing. Most people don't focus on home improvements when their spouse is missing. "Mr. Miller," Detective Blake called out as she stepped closer. John turned to face her, his expression shifting from surprise to a calm, almost practiced demeanor. Detective Sarah Blake showed him ID card. "Detective, I wasn't expecting anyone from the police today," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "What can I do for you?" "I'm here to talk about your wife, Ruby," Blake said, her gaze steady. "She's been reported missing by her friend, Elisa. Can you tell me when you last saw her?" John's face tensed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Ruby texted me about a week ago. Said she was going to visit a friend to sort out things about her new spa business. She needed some space to think. I haven't heard from her since." He pulled out his phone and showed Detective Blake the message. A brief note from Ruby, saying she needed some time away. The text seemed genuine, but there was something about John's manner that didn't sit right with Blake. His words were calm, too calculated, as if he had rehearsed this story in his mind. As they spoke, Blake's eyes wandered to the corners of the house where she spotted the CCTV cameras mounted near the roof. She made a mental note to ask about them. "I see you have security cameras. I assumed they were working the night Ruby went missing," she asked, her tone casual but pointed. John hesitated for just a moment. Yes, sure, but long enough for Blake to catch it. When John took Blake to the CCTV room, Blake started looking at the videos. She saw that there is no footage on and after October 13th. "Funny thing," John said with a forced smile. "The camera stopped working last week. I have no idea why. I never checked it because from the next day, I've been so busy in renovating my house." A police officer found that someone had turned off the CCTV recording on October 13th and never turned it back on. Blake nodded slowly, her mind turning over the details. The cameras got switched off on the exact night Ruby disappeared was too convenient to be mere coincidence. She knew this was a lead that needed further digging. John's house was situated on a quiet street far from the bustling city center, where few security measures existed apart from those cameras. Without footage, it would be hard to prove without direct evidence, but the timing was suspicious to say the least. As she continued her investigation, she learned more about Ruby's background. Originally from Seattle, she was an orphan. She had grown up in the foster care system, bouncing from home to home without a stable family to rely on. She had no close relatives, no one who would immediately notice her absence or raise the alarm. This isolation made her vulnerable, and Blake understood that predators often sought out those who wouldn't be missed. 6 months ago, on a bustling Saturday night, Elisa and Ruby decided to hit a nearby club for some drinks. However, it was the weekend and the place was packed, every table seemingly reserved. Undeterred, they clinked their glasses and began to enjoy their drinks standing near the bar, their eyes occasionally scanning the room in hopes of spotting an empty table. Ruby, exhausted from a long day spent arranging her newly rented home, was especially eager to find a seat. Finally, Ruby noticed a table with 4 chairs, occupied by a man in his 40s, sitting alone. He looked relaxed, quietly enjoying his drink. Ruby approached him with a polite smile. "Excuse me, would you mind if we join you? Just for a little while, we really need a place to sit." The man welcomed them warmly, gesturing for them to sit. As they settled, they began chatting, and soon he discovered that both women had recently moved to the area. The 3 quickly became engrossed in conversation, sharing laughs and stories. At one point, the man kindly offered to buy them a drink, but Ruby politely declined. She felt comfortable enough with him, but preferred to keep things friendly. After a while, the man opened up, sharing that he had lost his wife only a month ago. A somber pause fell over the table as Ruby and Elisa exchanged sympathetic glances, both feeling for him. The conversation gradually resumed, though this revelation lingered in the back of their minds. A little later, Elisa received a message from another friend and had to leave. Ruby and the man continued to chat for a few more minutes until it was time for her to head out as well. When the man found out that Ruby was going in the same direction, he offered her a ride. Ruby hesitated at first, concerned about his level of drinking, but he assured her he was fine and hadn't had much. "It's just 2 miles, he insisted, smiling reassuringly. Reluctantly, she agreed. As they drove, he pointed out his house, a charming, slightly older home tucked away along a quiet street. Ruby admired it, commenting on its unique beauty, and to her surprise, he invited her in for a quick tour. She hesitated but ultimately accepted, stepping into a cozy home filled with vintage charm. They chatted a bit more, exchanged their numbers, and said their goodnights. From that evening, their friendship grew steadily. They met often, sharing meals and stories, each slowly finding comfort in each other's company. After 2 months of building a bond that felt deeper than mere friendship, Ruby and the man, who was John, found themselves inseparable. Their connection, rooted in mutual understanding and warmth, blossomed into love, and not long after, they married, embarking on a new chapter together.
Today, as Detective Blake left John's house that day, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. The smell of fresh paint, the deactivated cameras, and John's too calm demeanor, it all added up to a picture that didn't quite fit. She knew that sometimes the smallest inconsistencies were the cracks that would eventually break a case wide open, and she was determined to find out exactly what John Miller was hiding. The investigation took a grim and urgent turn when Detective Blake, acting on the lead from John Miller's phone data, decided to expand their search to Forest Park. The park's dense canopy and twisting trails seemed to swallow up the early morning light, casting long shadows over the thick underbrush. Blake led her team, their eyes scanning every inch of the ground, their footsteps barely audible on the soft, leaf-covered terrain. Hours passed as they meticulously combed through the forest, the weight of dread growing heavier with each step. Then one of the officers called out, his voice tinged with shock and horror. "Detective, over here." Blake hurried over, her pulse quickening. As she reached the spot, she was met with a sight that turned her stomach. A badly burned female body, lying twisted and charred among the leaves. The remains were almost unrecognizable, reduced mostly to bone and ash, but something caught Blake's sharp eye. A small piece of jewelry, a belly button ring, a little bit melted but still distinct. The ring was simple, yet unique, a tiny charm dangling from the bar, barely surviving the intense flames. Blake's thoughts immediately turned to Alyssa. She knew that asking Alyssa to identify such a personal item would be painful, but it was necessary. Later that day, Alyssa arrived at the station, her face pale and drawn, her hands trembling, as she held them clasped tightly together. Detective Blake gently handed her the evidence bag containing the belly button ring. The moment Alyssa's eyes fell on it, she gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "That's Ruby's," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She bought it just last month. She was so excited about it, said it was her favorite piece of jewelry." Blake's suspicion of John Miller intensified. Back at the interrogation room, she confronted John with this new evidence. He sat across from her, his face a mask of feigned confusion, shaking his head as if genuinely perplexed by the situation. "I don't know anything about that ring or the body you found," he said firmly, though a flicker of unease passed across his eyes. "I told you Ruby was going to visit a friend. I haven't seen or heard from her since then. I swear I had nothing to do with this." But Blake wasn't convinced. The tension in the room was thick as she observed John, her instincts telling her there was more to his story than he was letting on. She knew he was hiding something, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. Determined to find more answers, Blake and her team went back to John's house, this time armed with the warrant for a thorough search. They scoured every corner, opening drawers, turning over furniture, and examining every inch of the freshly painted walls. In John's study, tucked away in a small desk drawer, they found a receipt for a belly button ring dated just a month earlier. Blake's eyes narrowed as she read the details. Quickly, they pulled the store records and surveillance footage from the jewelry shop. Sure enough, the video showed Ruby herself at the counter buying the ring with a smile on her face. It was undeniable proof that the ring belonged to her, linking her directly to the burned remains found in Forest Park. But even with this evidence, John continued to deny his involvement. "I didn't buy that ring for her," he insisted, his voice growing more defensive. "She got it herself. I didn't even know she wore it. You have to believe me. I have nothing to do with this.
I have no idea how she ended up in that park. The forensic team's report soon confirmed the worst. The victim had been strangled before her body was set ablaze. The fire deliberately started to destroy any evidence. The condition of the remains made it almost impossible to confirm the identity definitively without a DNA match, but all the circumstantial evidence pointed toward Ruby. Blake's gut told her that John was lying, that he knew more about what had happened to Ruby than he let on. But without conclusive proof that the body was Ruby's, they were stuck with the case built on bits and pieces that didn't yet form a complete picture. To make matters worse, the house had been thoroughly cleaned and repainted, erasing any trace of Ruby's presence. It was as if he had scrubbed away every clue that could tie him to her disappearance. Blake stared at John, her eyes hard with determination. She knew this case was far from over. The truth was out there, buried under layers of deception, and she was going to peel back each one until she found it. In the sterile light of the police station, John sat across from the detective, his face pale, weary from hours of questioning, yet unwavering in his statement. "I don't understand any of this," he said, his voice steady but strained. "I was asleep that night. I even read her message saying that she was going to meet a friend to discuss the spa. I don't know how my phone's location ended up in the middle of a forest. And I was even helping her financially to set up a spa." Blake studied him carefully, her pen tapping against her notepad. She'd heard many alibis before, but there was something about John's confusion that seemed genuine. "You were helping her financially to set up a spa?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "Yes," John replied earnestly. "She told me she'd always dreamed of opening her own spa. I love her. Of course I wanted to support her. I put up my own house as collateral to help her secure the loan. Why on earth would I go through all of that just to harm her?" His voice cracked, and he looked away, eyes clouded with a mixture of sadness and frustration. The woman he thought he knew, the life he'd begun to build with her, it was all slipping away in the wake of this brutal accusation. "I loved Ruby," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else in the room. "Why would I kill her?" Blake scribbled a few notes, her expression softening as she took in his apparent heartbreak. But under her sympathy, her mind continued to work, the pieces of this bizarre puzzle assembling into a picture more sinister than even John could have imagined. Blake sat across from Melissa, pen poised as she went over John's statements, determined to cross-check every detail. "John mentioned that he was helping Ruby open a spa center," Blake said, watching Alyssa's reaction carefully. Alyssa looked at her, clearly unfazed. "A spa center? I don't know anything about that," she replied coolly. Blake's pen stilled. He claimed he'd even put up his house as collateral to help her secure a loan for it. Alyssa shrugged. "If that's true, it's news to me. Ruby never said a word about opening a spa." Blake leaned in, voice even. "And their marriage?" Alyssa gave a dry smile. "Not as rosy as he makes it sound. John had a controlling side. Ruby used to tell me about it. He'd always find a way to keep her under his thumb." In the courtroom, John's lawyer rose, his voice calm yet assertive, capitalizing on a critical point in his defense. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the judge and jury, "there is simply no concrete evidence that the burned body found in the forest belongs to Ruby. We have no DNA samples to conclusively identify her. And as you know, Ruby was an orphan, no known family, no available records that could assist in verifying her identity." He paused, and letting the weight of the words settle over the room. "Furthermore," he continued, "the police were unable to secure any DNA from John's residence to match against the remains. And even John's DNA was not found in the forest area. We are left, therefore, with nothing more than speculation." The lawyer's gaze swept the jury. "Without DNA, without a reliable means of identifying the body, this case lacks the proof necessary to condemn my client. This is reasonable doubt in its purest form." As the weeks passed, the investigation seemed to stall, and the evidence against John Miller remained frustratingly inconclusive. Despite the growing suspicion, there wasn't enough hard proof to hold him. John was released on bail, his constant protest of innocence sounding hollow to almost everyone except his loyal attorney, who stood firmly by his side. To the public, John was a man under a dark cloud of suspicion, but legally, he was a free man, if only for the time being. Throughout the ordeal, Alyssa's support was almost too perfect, helpful, but without providing any truly groundbreaking leads. Determined to leave no stone unturned, Detective Blake decided to retrace every step of the investigation. He decided to revisit the area between John's house and Forest Park, focusing on the possibility of finding any CCTV cameras that might have recorded the route. When scanning the streets, he paused near John's house, her eyes narrowing as she observed it from outside, pondering if he could catch John off guard. As he continued his rounds, he passed by Alyssa's house. A man was standing outside, nailing a for rent sign to the fence. She was shocked to know that Alyssa vacated that house. Sensing an opportunity, he approached that old man, hoping to glean some information about John's past. Because John's house was just the next street, there was a chance that the old man might know John personally.
"Excuse me," she said, nodding toward the house. "Do you know much about John Miller or any details about the CCTV systems in the area?" The landlord, shaking his head, responded, "No, I don't really know John Miller personally. I just read about his wife murder in the newspaper, and there are no CCTV cameras around here that I'm aware of." He paused and then added, almost as an afterthought, "But I do know Elisa was renting this place. She told me right from the beginning that she was only going to stay for a year." This detail caught Blake's attention. "Only a year?" she repeated, a puzzled expression crossing his face. "Yes," the landlord confirmed. "Elisa moved in with that lady, Ruby, I believe, when she signed the lease. Ruby helped arrange the whole thing. It seemed like Elisa knew exactly how long she'd be here." A chill ran down the officer's spine. Why would Elisa plan from the start for her to stay only 1 year? It seemed almost as if she had a timeline in mind from the very beginning, a plan that Elisa was now executing by leaving town. Detective Blake's fingers tightened around her phone as a gnawing suspicion took root. The new lead about Elisa was far too compelling to ignore. She punched in Elisa's number, heart pounding as the line rang. But instead of hearing Elisa's voice, a mechanical response echoed back. "The number you were trying to reach is currently switched off." Blake's jaw clenched. She dialed John, hoping he might offer some insight into Elisa's whereabouts, only to meet the same dead end. His number, too, was switched off. The detective felt a flicker of dread. Was this just a coincidence, or was something far darker playing out beneath the surface? Questions twisted through her mind. Could Elisa and John be working together? Had she overlooked something crucial? Was there a tangled web of deception? Perhaps even a love triangle gone wrong? Determined to follow every possible lead, Blake drove to John's house. She arrived only to find it deserted, the lights off, the rooms silent. Her instincts screamed that something was amiss. Back at the station, she promptly assigned Officer Reynolds to keep an eye on John's property and report any movement. For 2 days, she heard nothing but silence, her thoughts circling around unanswered questions. Then on the evening of the second day, Reynolds' voice crackled over the radio. "Detective Blake, John's back." Blake didn't waste a second. Heading straight to John's house, she arrived to find him standing in the doorway, looking exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. Wasting no time, she asked,
"Where have you been, John? And why was your phone off?" John sighed, rubbing a hand over his weary face. "Detective, after I got out on bail, reporters and journalists wouldn't leave me alone. Calls flooded my phone day and night, demanding interviews. I couldn't take it anymore, so I changed my number." He paused, eyes drifting to the floor. "I need a space, Detective. I've been feeling lost, overwhelmed, so I went to my brother's farmhouse to clear my mind." Blake studied him, looking for cracks in his story, but his eyes seemed genuinely tired, his voice flat with weariness. She decided to press further. "And Elisa? Have you heard from her?" His expression shifted, his brows drawing together in a look of confusion and frustration. "I don't know where she is. Honestly, Detective, I'm starting to think she might be behind everything. It's like she's the one pulling the strings in this whole mess." Blake's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that, John?" He shook his head, looking away. "I don't know. It's just a feeling. Everything was fine until she started showing up more, asking questions, stirring things up. And now with her gone and my name dragged through the mud, it just doesn't add up." Blake nodded, feeling the pieces slowly but surely falling into place. But the picture they formed remained shrouded in shadows. Blake decided to reach out to the owner of the restaurant where Elisa used to work, hoping for some insights into her sudden departure. The owner, a middle-aged man with a friendly face and a calm demeanor, seemed genuinely concerned as he recounted what he knew. "Elisa was really shaken up by her friend's death. I think that's why she wanted to leave town, just to escape all those painful memories," he explained with a sad nod. "She needed a fresh start." Blake listened intently, but something about the owner's sympathetic tone felt a little too warm, almost as if he had a personal attachment to Elisa. She couldn't ignore the thought prickling at the back of her mind. Could she be involved in her friend's murder somehow? After all, Elisa had been the first to report her friend missing, but then swiftly disconnected from everyone. New city, new phone number, everything. It seemed like she wanted to bury the past, yet the timing felt too neat to Blake. Not one to leave things to chance, Blake decided to dig deeper. She discreetly tapped into her network of local contacts to see if there was anything unusual about the restaurant owner himself. After a thorough background check, she came up empty-handed. The owner was clean, no criminal record, no suspicious connections, nothing to suggest he was part of any dark scheme. With that lead exhausted, Blake was left pondering Elisa's motives, now more certain that if there was a hidden layer to this story, it lay with Elisa. One idea struck her: a DNA test. If Elisa was hiding something, maybe her past would provide the clues. Cross-check her DNA test with the registered criminal DNA. Blake contacted the landlord of the house Elisa had rented. He was cooperative, agreeing to let a forensic team go through the property one last time. The team was meticulous, combing through the place for anything that might yield DNA evidence. After an exhaustive search, one of the experts found a small piece of chewing gum wedged under the edge of a windowsill. It seemed like a minor detail, but to Blake, it was a potential gold mine. They sent the gum to the lab for DNA analysis, comparing the results against the National Criminal Database. Blake wasn't prepared for what came next: a match to a cold case that had been sitting in the archives for 3 years. The DNA from the chewing gum matched a sample connected to the murderer of a woman named Julie, who was reported murdered under eerily similar circumstances years ago in Arizona. Detective Blake dove into the details of the cold case. Julie was a mysterious figure, living under a fabricated identity. Her body was never conclusively identified, but a bandage with traces of blood was found near her remains, suspected to belong to her attacker. Now, that same DNA matched with Elisa McCain. Blake's pulse quickened as she realized that the DNA found on that bandage in Arizona matched the chewing gum from Elisa's rental house in Portland. As Blake pored over the case files and the old crime scene photos, she saw the face of Julie. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to click into place. Blake recalled something Elisa had mentioned during the initial investigation, that both she and Ruby had grown up in the same orphanage. At the time, it seemed like a trivial detail, a sad but relatable background for two friends who had found solace in each other. But now, in light of the new evidence, it took on a far more sinister tone. Blake's search for Elisa intensified. She had left the city just 11 days ago, and every lead seemed to vanish into thin air. Needing an edge, Blake enlisted the help of some skilled cyber experts. They discovered that Elisa had done more than just turn off her phone. She'd abandoned it entirely. Her social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, were deactivated. Not a single digital footprint left behind. It was clear she had taken every possible step to disappear. Suspicion deepened when the experts reviewed her financial records. Her bank account and credit cards had been untouched for the past 20 days. The last transaction? A $2,000 withdrawal from an ATM. Just enough to fuel her escape. But to track Elisa seemed like a dead end, and Blake could feel the trail going cold. One officer, however, proposed an idea. He said if she withdrew cash, she might have bought a new phone nearby. They identified 3 electronic stores close to the ATM where she withdrew the cash. With new hope, Blake and her team set out to check the CCTV footage from all 3 stores. Hours of surveillance footage later, they finally hit pay dirt. In one of the recordings, Elisa could be seen purchasing a phone with cash. The shopkeeper confirmed it. Pulling out a duplicate receipt, the phone had been bought under the name of Seren. But the cyber team wasn't done there. They pulled the IMEI number from the receipt and tracked down the new phone's number. Within hours, they had narrowed down her approximate location, bringing them closer to a breakthrough. One evening, Blake with some police officers walked into a club in the next city, her heart pounding with the thrill of a lead about to be solved. She scanned the crowd, and there they were. Elisa and Ruby, laughing over drinks, completely unaware of the net closing around them. Yes, Ruby. She was never killed. With swift precision, Blake moved in, her team surrounding the women. Elisa and Ruby, stunned, barely had time to react before they were handcuffed and led out of the club. That day, as Blake pored over the details of the Julie murder case, a chill ran down her spine. The similarities to Ruby's case were uncanny, as if someone had taken the blueprint and merely swapped the names. Page after page mirrored the same story, the same eerie sequence of events. But it was the last page that stopped her cold. There, in a faded photograph, was Julie, a young woman with familiar features. Blake's eyes widened as she recognized her. Julie was none other than Ruby herself. This revelation hit her hard, and suddenly everything began to fall into place. Ruby hadn't been killed. She had been the prop in a twisted performance. Her mind raced through the pieces she'd already gathered. The DNA found at the scene of Ruby's murder was thought to be the killer's. But now Blake saw it clearly. It wasn't just any mistake. It was Elisa's. In her haste, Elisa's bandaged wound had come undone while she'd been burning the body, leaving traces of herself at the scene. It was a small but fatal slip-up, and Blake could now see the entire scheme unfolding in perfect detail. Blake's breath caught as the reality set in. Elisa and Ruby had been using the same twisted pattern for years, assuming new identities, conning unsuspecting men, and staging each other's deaths to cover their tracks and escape with the loot. Every case she'd come across had followed this exact plan, only this time, Elisa had made a single, damning mistake. Blake knew what she had to do. They had them, finally, and this time, they wouldn't slip away. It was almost the perfect plan. They first settle on the outskirts of towns and visit nearby clubs to find their target, a rich, middle-aged single man. One of them would marry that lonely, vulnerable man, take out significant loans, and then stage their own deaths by using the bodies of other women. To make the deaths believable, they left behind personal jewelry to identify the victims, then wiped the whole house to clean up any DNA evidence, disappearing with the money before anyone could catch on. Under the stark lighting of the interrogation room, Elisa and Ruby sat opposite Blake, their expressions tense but resigned. They knew it was over. With a deep breath, Elisa began to recount the twisted tale, and Ruby picked up where she left off, filling in the details. A few months back, they had moved to Portland, Oregon, scoping out nearby clubs, searching for a new mark. Soon enough, they found him, John, a wealthy, unsuspecting man who quickly fell under Ruby's spell. She played her part perfectly, pretending to fall deeply in love. Within 2 months, they were married. John was smitten, and Ruby was calculating, carefully planning her next move. She mentioned to John that she had a spa management degree and dreamed of opening her own spa. To make this happen, she explained, she'd need a loan. John, ever supportive, agreed to help, using his house as collateral so she could secure the funds. But there was never going to be a spa. As soon as the loan money cleared, Ruby and Elisa began working on the next step of their plan. Ruby proposed a renovation of John's house to start shortly after the incident. The idea was that the timing of the renovations would make it seem as though John were hiding evidence. The renovation was scheduled to begin on October 14th, so they set the date, October 13th. That evening, Ruby slipped sleeping pills into John's juice. As soon as he fell into a deep sleep, she turned off the house's CCTV cameras. Ruby sent a message to Elisa saying that she was afraid she would be murdered by her husband, John. Elisa left her own phone at home to avoid being tracked, then came to Ruby's house, taking every precaution to cover any trace of herself. Together, they used chemicals to erase any DNA that might incriminate them later. Ruby sent the pre-written message to John's phone to make it appear as though she were off to visit a friend to discuss spa preparations. Ruby sent this message with a calculated purpose. She knew John would eventually show it to the police, just as she planned. When the authorities traced Ruby's phone to its last known location, they would conclude that John had used her phone himself to send that message, likely after murdering her. It was a perfect setup to present John as an oversmart dumb killer and was meticulously crafted to shift all suspicion onto him, her final step in framing John as her killer. Then she destroyed her phone in the house and took John's mobile phone with her. Taking Elisa's car, they hid it to the outskirts of a red light district, finding a street sex worker who matched Ruby's height and build. Once the woman was in the car, Ruby looped a rope around her neck from behind, strangling her in one swift motion. They knew no one would report a street sex worker missing. She was an easy target, unnoticed and unmissed, a face that blended into the city's shadows. It was precisely why they chose her, confident that no one would come looking. With the deadly body in the trunk, they drove to a secluded forest. They doused the body with oil, set it ablaze, and placed Ruby's distinctive gold belly button ring beside it, ensuring identification would lead police in the wrong direction. When the task was complete, they came back to John's house and Ruby put back the mobile phone at the table. Then Elisa drove Ruby to a bus station where she took the first bus to a neighboring city. Days passed in silence until a week later, Elisa called 911, reporting Ruby missing. The police began investigating, just as they had planned.
If Arizona police even tried to match the DNA sample found at the crime scene with Elisa, John and that sex worker could escape being her next victim.